Hey, truth seekers, ever wonder if those enchanting childhood stories were actually a bit messed up? We grew up with tales of princesses, princes, and the promise of happily ever after. But what if beneath the magic lies a darker psychological pattern? Today, we're diving into the hidden truths and dark psychology lurking in your favorite fairy tales. This isn't about ruining memories. It's about seeing these stories with a critical eye. We'll explore codependency, unhealthy relationships, and why happily ever after might be the most damaging lie of all. Get ready to question the heroes, reevaluate the heroines, and rethink the idea of fairy tale romance. Let's unmask the hidden truths and see these classics in a whole new light. Let's talk codependency, a relationship where one person's self-worth depends entirely on another. Sound familiar? Cinderella waits for rescue, her value defined by being chosen, not by her own actions. Sleeping Beauty is literally passive, her fate sealed until a man awakens her. These stories glorify waiting for a savior, not self-empowerment. Snow White finds purpose only by serving others. Belle sacrifices herself and falls for her captor. The message: losing yourself and seeking external validation is romantic. These aren't just stories, they're blueprints for unhealthy relationships. Codependency is presented as an ideal, not a problem. It's time to see these tales for what they really teach. Why dissect these stories now? Because they've shaped our ideas of love and relationships for generations. Princes rescue, princesses wait, roles we're taught to emulate. Internalizing these scripts leads to disappointment and dysfunction. We wait for someone to complete us, mistaking sacrifice for love. The happily ever after myth ignores the real work of relationships. By understanding codependency, we see how these tales set us up for unhealthy patterns. Our goal: challenge these outdated scripts and reclaim our own narratives. Let's write new stories based on equality, self-worth, and real connection. Fairy tales promise that love is effortless once you find the one. The story ends at the wedding, skipping the real work of partnership. Real relationships are messy, evolving, and require effort. The fairy tale illusion sets us up to see conflict as failure. Cinderella never faces real-life challenges. Sleeping Beauty wakes to a stranger. We measure our lives against a flawless, fictional standard. The myth whispers, if it's hard, it's not true love. Believing this blinds us to the beauty of real, imperfect relationships. Fairy tales glorify passivity, especially in heroines. Cinderella, Snow White, Sleeping Beauty, all rewarded for waiting, not acting. The message: endure suffering, be beautiful, and wait for rescue. This is codependency, outsourcing happiness and self-worth to someone else. The heroine is a blank slate, defined by her rescuer. Dependency is romanticized, creating power imbalances from the start. We're taught to wait for a magic fix, not to solve our own problems. This fantasy leads to learned helplessness and tolerating the intolerable. It's time to build our own ladders and climb out of the tower. Expecting real life to mirror fairy tales leads to disappointment. When reality falls short, we blame ourselves or our partners. The happily ever after myth leaves no room for the ordinary or difficult. Real love is happy for now, requiring effort and commitment. Comparing our lives to fairy tales erodes gratitude and contentment. We judge real partners against fictional perfection. Internalizing these ideals breeds inadequacy and self-doubt. The cruelest lie: chasing an illusion instead of building a real, imperfect life. What's fascinating is that the romanticized interpretation of fairy tales is a modern distortion. The original stories collected by the Brothers Grimm were darker and more complex. These tales were psychological maps of our deepest fears and shadow selves. Through 20th century adaptations, the core message became twisted. Narratives were repackaged as love stories, shifting the focus to a wealthy spouse. This is where the dark psychology takes root in our cultural consciousness. We internalize unhealthy patterns as desirable goals. We need to rediscover the original intent and see them as psychological explorations. Fairy tales often present a damaging picture of love. To understand codependency, we turn to Pia Mellody, an internationally renowned therapist whose insights have revolutionized our understanding of dysfunctional patterns. Her work provides a framework to dissect the behavior of fairy tale characters. In her influential book, she offers a clinical model for identifying codependent thinking, emotions, and behaviors. Mellody argues that codependency stems from growing up in a dysfunctional family environment where a child's emotional needs were not met. This framework unlocks the dark psychology of fairy tales, where heroines often come from backgrounds of neglect and abuse. Pia Mellody's work becomes even more illuminating when we examine her 5 primary symptoms of adult codependency. These are the specific, identifiable traits that manifest as a result of those early childhood wounds. As I list them, try to picture the fairy tale heroines we have been discussing. The first symptom is difficulty experiencing appropriate levels of self-esteem, meaning one's self-worth is derived from external sources rather than from an inherent sense of value. The second is difficulty setting functional boundaries, which involves being unable to protect oneself from being controlled or taken advantage of by others, while also struggling not to control others. The third symptom identified by Melody is difficulty owning one's own reality. This means a person struggles to identify and be true to their own thoughts, feelings, and perceptions, often deferring to what others think they should feel or believe. The fourth symptom is difficulty acknowledging and meeting one's own needs and wants, where an individual learns to prioritize the needs of others to an extreme degree, often at their own expense. Finally, the fifth symptom is difficulty experiencing and expressing one's reality in moderation, leading to extreme reactions, either by being overly emotional or by being completely detached and numb. Does this list sound familiar? It should, because these 5 symptoms read like a character profile for almost every classic fairy tale princess. These are the very traits that are not only displayed, but are often glorified and rewarded within the narrative structure. The heroines are celebrated for their lack of ego, their boundless self-sacrifice, and their unwavering focus on the needs of others. Their inability to set boundaries is framed as virtuous patience, their suppression of needs is seen as selfless kindness, and their ultimate reliance on an external rescuer is presented as the romantic ideal, the very definition of finding true love. This is the insidious nature of the fairy tale trap. It takes the symptoms of a painful psychological condition and reframes them as admirable feminine virtues. It teaches us to see codependency not as a wound that needs healing, but as a path to a happily ever after. By romanticizing these dysfunctional patterns, the stories normalize them, encouraging generations to aspire to a state of being that is, according to psychological experts like Melody, fundamentally unhealthy. The fairy tale doesn't just contain codependency, it actively promotes it as a recipe for romantic success, a dangerous and misleading message. Let's look at Cinderella through the lens of codependency. She's a textbook case, her self-esteem, non-existent. Worth is external, defined by abuse, then validated by the prince. No self-love, happiness contingent on being chosen. She doesn't decide, she waits for magic, a core symptom. Boundaries, non-existent. Exploited, abused, treated as a servant. No protest, no defense, no leaving. Helplessness is praised, a symptom of codependency. She's surrendered her rights, dependent on withheld goodwill. She doesn't own her reality, accepting her fate. She doesn't think she deserves better or question injustice. She suppresses her needs. It takes a fairy godmother to voice her desires. Her story is a plea for rescue, the ultimate codependent dynamic. She's not active in her salvation, but a passive recipient. It's not a love story, but a wounded person finding a savior. Let's delve into Sleeping Beauty. Princess Aurora is the ultimate embodiment of passivity. Her existence is put on hold, dependent on a man's intervention. She is cursed to sleep until a stranger arrives to kiss her. She is inert, incapable of action, choice, or contribution to her own destiny. Her story happens to her while she is asleep. This glorification of female powerlessness is dangerous. It reinforces the unhealthy idea that a woman's agency is secondary until activated by a man. Aurora has no voice, no desires, and no part to play in her own rescue. She is a beautiful, silent object, a prize to be won. This is a metaphor for someone who has surrendered their power, whose identity is dormant. The narrative suggests this vulnerability is the prerequisite for her happily ever after. The prince is drawn to her sleeping form, her catalepsy becoming her most attractive feature. The relationship begins with an act of non-consensual contact. Sleeping Beauty teaches a perilous lesson. A woman can be entirely absent and still be deemed worthy of love and rescue. Now, let's unmask a tale that is often lauded as a more progressive story, Beauty and the Beast. On the surface, the narrative seems to be about looking beyond superficial appearances to find the inner beauty within. However, when we dig just a little deeper, we uncover a far more disturbing and classic codependent dynamic, the trauma bond. Belle is, for all intents and purposes, a prisoner. She sacrifices her own freedom to save her father and becomes the captive of a volatile, aggressive, and emotionally manipulative creature. Her story is not one of falling in love, but of developing an attachment to her abuser. This dynamic is often referred to as Stockholm Syndrome, where hostages develop a psychological alliance with their captors as a survival strategy. Belle's situation fits this pattern with unnerving precision. She is isolated from her previous life, entirely dependent on the beast for her survival, and subjected to his terrifying outbursts of rage. Over time, she begins to see small acts of kindness not as the bare minimum of human decency, but as profound gestures of a changing heart. She starts to empathize with his pain and takes on the responsibility for his emotional well-being, a classic role for the codependent fixer. The entire premise of the story rests on a deeply unhealthy codependent belief that you can and should change a troubled and abusive partner through your unwavering love and patience. The beast's transformation is not his own responsibility. It is entirely contingent on Belle's ability to love him before the last petal falls. This places an immense and unfair burden on Belle, teaching the dangerous lesson that it is a woman's job to heal a man's wounds, even at the cost of her own safety and happiness. This is not healthy love. It is a relationship built on control, emotional blackmail, and conditional affection. The narrative romanticizes this codependent tango, where one person's dysfunction becomes the other's life mission. The beast remains stuck in his pattern of anger and manipulation, unable to fix himself, while Belle pours her energy into managing his emotions and trying to save him. This is the very essence of a codependent relationship, where one partner's identity becomes consumed by the need to rescue the other. It's a story that frames a toxic trauma bond as the ultimate romance, dangerously blurring the lines between love, pity, and emotional entrapment for generations of impressionable viewers. While Belle is seen as an empowered heroine, her agency is largely an illusion. Her defining characteristic is self-sacrifice, driving her into the codependent trap. She trades her freedom for her father, demonstrating that her needs are secondary. This is a classic symptom of codependency, the inability to prioritize one's own well-being. Once inside the castle, her world shrinks until the beast is at its very center. Her primary focus becomes fixing him, taking on the role of his unpaid therapist. She is not building a relationship based on mutual respect. She is engaging in a high-stakes project of rehabilitation. Her own intellectual pursuits are quickly forgotten, replaced by managing her captor's curse. This highlights a core symptom of codependency: difficulty owning one's own reality. She adapts her reality to fit the narrative that he is a victim who needs her help. Ultimately, Belle's story is not one of choice, but of fixation. The narrative rewards her self-abandonment, validating her efforts and sacrifices. This is a profoundly dangerous fantasy. Even Snow White falls into a codependent trap. After fleeing her stepmother, she finds the dwarf's cottage. Her instinct is to clean and cook, tying her value to serving others. She trades servitude for shelter, her safety contingent on domestic labor, reinforcing that a woman's worth lies in her utility to men. Snow White remains passive, failing to set boundaries. She depends on the dwarves and, ultimately, the prince. This reinforces a codependent need for a protector. She never develops an internal sense of value, constantly needing rescue. The story teaches that a woman's path to security is through being agreeable and protected by men. The Little Mermaid starkly illustrates erasing one's reality for love. Ariel sacrifices her voice, her expressive self, for a chance at love. This disturbing metaphor shows how codependent individuals silence their needs to please a partner. Ariel's bargain is built on self-abandonment. She must make the prince fall in love with a curated, silent version of herself. This self-mutilation is framed as a noble sacrifice. The narrative glorifies changing who you are for a relationship. Her future hinges on the affection of a man who cannot truly know her. This creates pressure to perform, a hallmark of codependency. This isn't the foundation for a healthy partnership. Ariel's journey is one of erasure, not connection. The sanitized ending rewards self-erasure, teaching a dangerous lesson. Codependency is a two-way street. The princes in these tales often embody the other side of the codependent coin, the rescuer. Their identity is frequently tied to their ability to save a damsel in distress. This Prince Charming complex pressures men to be strong rescuers who always have the answers. This rescuer role is inherently codependent because the rescuer's self-esteem is derived from being needed. The savior needs someone to save, creating a symbiotic relationship where both parties are trapped. This prevents a truly intimate connection based on mutual vulnerability. By examining both roles, we see the codependent system that fairy tales portray. This dynamic prevents true growth. Envision a new story where two whole people come together to complement one another. So after this journey, what does this all mean? Should we banish every Disney movie and Grimm's collection from our homes? Of course not. These tales are deeply embedded in our culture. Our task as conscious adults is to become more critical of the narratives we are fed. We must learn to separate the enchanting entertainment from the unhealthy psychological scripts. It's time to recognize that these stories were never meant to be reliable blueprints for building healthy, modern relationships. The first step is to fundamentally redefine what happily ever after means. We must move beyond the childish fantasy of a static, perfect endpoint and embrace a more mature, dynamic understanding of happiness. A true happily ever after is not a destination. It is an ongoing daily practice of choosing to create joy and growth. It is messy, it is challenging, and it is built not on a magical kiss, but on a foundation of difficult conversations and shared vulnerabilities. This requires a radical shift in perspective. We must stop looking for a partner to complete us, and instead focus on becoming whole within ourselves. The real fairy tale isn't about finding someone who will rescue you. It is about learning how to build your own staircase. Reclaim your fairy tale by casting yourself in the leading role. Stop waiting for a hero and become your own. Take control of your narrative, make choices aligned with your values, and take responsibility for your well-being. Your life is the main event, and you are the star. Cultivate strong boundaries, say no to what harms you, and yes to what nurtures you. Own your reality, trust your perceptions, and honor your feelings. Build a strong, resilient self. Healthy relationships require self-reliance. Build your own kingdom. Rescue yourself by facing your fears and healing your traumas. Stop waiting for a savior and unlock your immense power. So what does a modern, healthy fairy tale look like? It is a story written on the principles of equality, respect, and mutual growth. In this new narrative, love is not about possession or rescue, but about partnership and support. The protagonists are not a passive princess and a heroic prince, but two sovereign individuals who choose to walk their paths together for a time, enhancing each other's journeys without controlling them. They are two heroes, co-authoring a shared chapter, each with their own story to tell. They celebrate each other's strengths and support each other's vulnerabilities. A healthy fairy tale is built on a foundation of strong boundaries. Both partners have a clear sense of where they end and the other begins. They can communicate their needs and limits openly and honestly, without fear of punishment or abandonment. This creates a safe space where both individuals can be their authentic selves. In this version of the story, Belle would not have stayed in the castle. She would have recognized the beast's behavior as abuse and left, understanding that her safety and well-being are non-negotiable. Her love story would begin with the ultimate act of self-love, protecting herself. Furthermore, in this reclaimed narrative, transformation is an inside job. A healthy partner does not try to fix or change the other. The beast's healing would be his own responsibility, a journey he would have to undertake for himself, not as a condition to win Belle's love. A healthy relationship supports growth, but it does not demand it as payment for affection. Love becomes a space where two people are inspired to be their best selves, not a project where one person is tasked with renovating the other. The magic comes from mutual encouragement, not from codependent enmeshment. Ultimately, the new happily ever after is not a final destination, but a conscious commitment. It is the promise to keep showing up, to keep communicating, to keep choosing each other, and to keep growing, both individually and together. It is a story free from the illusion of perfection, embracing the messy, beautiful reality of a shared life. So I ask you, what does your fairy tale look like? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's start a conversation and help each other break free from the fairy tale trap, one authentic, self-written story at a time.